That dramatic footage is from a civilian break-in at an IDF base in Israel in July 2024. It set off a scandal that just gets bigger by the day and is known in Israel as the Sde Teiman affair. We get into it all. Stay tuned. Hi. So this episode has turned into something much bigger than I had anticipated. I'm referring, of course, to what is known as the Sde Teiman affair in Israel, and it's shaping up to be a scandal of epic implications. The case is in its earliest stages still, but it threatens to impugn the IDF Military Advocate General Office, the highest legal office in Israel, that of the Attorney General of the state, and regrettably draws in even more very high-level interests. I'm going to divide this podcast episode into 4 sections. You can find the timestamps in the podcast notes on our website, stateoftelaviv.com. In the first section, I'll set out the facts so that you understand the big issues. You must have the facts. The story seems to have begun in July 2024 and is still developing at a quick pace. Section 2 of the podcast consists of an interview I did last week with Ben Wahlhous. He's an attorney in private practice today in Israel and a former member of the Military Advocate General Unit of the IDF, or MAG, as we call it. Ben brings perspective, deep knowledge of the law, and how the unit operates. Section 3 is a short update on where things stand at the moment. I record this on Sunday afternoon in Israel. Since I put this podcast to bed last night, or thought I did, much has transpired, and the new developments are significant. I'll bring you up to date now. Section 4 of the podcast offers a moment of levity. Even in the darkest times, Israelis retain a sharp sense of humor. And this was on full display on Saturday evening at the end of the regular talk show, Hashing Out All Things Political, which is hosted by 2 journalists on Channel 12, Ben Caspit and Amit Segal. They conducted an experiment on air. But to understand the humor, you have to be familiar with the facts. This story is not going away anytime soon. It has the potential to be the catalyst for a massive shakeup of government and the IDF. There's been a very different mood in Israel during the past month since the Trump peace plan was signed and a new stage of life in this country began. A ceasefire with Hamas. How it's progressing and how it will hold remain to be seen. For the last 10 days or so, Israelis have been kind of transfixed and focused on another matter. The photo you see on the screen now is of 51-year-old Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi, who, until her resignation on October 31st, served as the head of the Military Advocate General Corps in the Army. A major general in the IDF, Tomer Yerushalmi is the second woman to achieve such a high rank ever. Her position is of critical importance. She oversees the legal compliance with state and international law of the IDF. Okay, so here's the story. It has become known in Israel as the Sde Teiman affair. In the immediate October 7th chaos and the months following, Israel was overrun with thousands of captured prisoners who were all initially detained at the Sde Teiman prison in southern Israel. In July of 2024, allegations surfaced regarding severe abuse of prisoners at Sde Teiman. There was a grainy, brief video that was leaked and purported to show soldiers abusing a male prisoner. And as we will discuss in this podcast, it actually shows very little. The prisoner in the video, however, required hospital treatment, and his injuries were so severe that the MAG unit, led by Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi at the time, detained 9 soldiers for questioning. That act of detaining soldiers during a war enraged a segment of the Israeli population. They were predominantly what most people would consider to be extreme right-wing people who tend to support Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. Several members of Knesset and even a few cabinet ministers were also furious. On the day the soldiers were detained, a mob showed up at the IDF base where the 9 soldiers were being held for questioning. This mob became violent and broke into an IDF base. It was chaotic, dangerous, and unprecedented. Never before had Israeli civilians broken into an IDF base. This was a red line. When the detainees were moved to a second base, the mob moved with them and repeated this violent conduct, breaking into a second base. This clip shows you what went down on that night in late July 2024. After initial questioning, 5 of the 9 detained soldiers were indicted on serious criminal charges by the Office of the Military Advocate General. This further inflamed tensions. Some Israelis were of the view that during a war, and the country was still very much at war, they were of the view that no soldier should be subject to prosecution. Our podcast guest today, Ben Wahlhous, is an attorney who worked in the MAG unit for about a decade, and he's now in private practice in Israel. He told me that no democracy supports such investigative activity during a war. Okay, so back to this quite extreme and unprecedented situation. There were and remain many questions. The first big issue was, who leaked the video? As it happens, the Military Advocate General, Ifat Tomer Yerushalmi, led an investigation into the leak. Her report, inconclusive. It was unclear, she said, who leaked the video. That conclusion was not well received in certain quarters, so the Attorney General for the State of Israel, Gali Baharav Miara, who has oversight over all legal authorities, including the military legal unit, she received and reviewed the report of the MAG Advocate General. Attorney General Baharav Miara subsequently reported to the Israeli Supreme Court and a Knesset committee that she had reviewed the MAG report and the evidence relied upon. And her conclusion was that the MAG investigation was conducted properly and in accordance with Israeli and international legal standards. The issue of the leak did not go away, but the discussion shifted somewhat to this question. There was clearly a leak. Was there also a cover-up? That was and remains big legal issue number 2. Who leaked, when and why, who was involved in authorizing and leaking such sensitive matters, who was involved in a cover-up? Those questions bring us to the present. At the end of October, a member of the MAG unit took a polygraph test. It was a routine procedure. She was being considered for promotion within the unit. She failed the lie detector test. And based on media reports, it seems that she was tripped up on the issue of the video leak. Ifat Tomer Yerushalmi was put on immediate leave, and within days, she admitted in a letter of resignation dated October 31st that she had authorized the leak of the video in July 2024. That bombshell admission means that she was actively involved in covering up her role in the leak for more than a year. It means that she maintained this lie, even as the inconclusive investigative report into the leak incident, the report that she had signed off on, was reviewed by the Attorney General, the Supreme Court, and a committee of the Knesset. For a lawyer, this is thermonuclear. The heart of the profession is about ethical conduct, meaning honesty, integrity. And Ifat Tomer Yerushalmi flagrantly breached that core professional duty on an ongoing basis for more than a year. She lied to the highest authorities in the land, and she lied to the public. But that's just the beginning of the drama. Late afternoon on Monday, November 3rd, Tomer Yerushalmi's husband phoned the police and said that he was concerned. She wasn't answering her phone. He had no idea where she was. And furthermore, he told police she'd left kind of weird handwritten note. The contents were unclear, but it suggested that she may self-harm. Over the next 3 to 4 hours on Sunday evening last week, there was a massive search that was undertaken. Her car was located on a cliffside beach north of Tel Aviv, and this massive search, involved sea, air, and land operatives. Tomer Yerushalmi herself was located after 3 or 4 hours, safe and sound. Her cell phone, however, was nowhere to be found. Here's a clip of the search when she disappeared for a few hours. It was quite the spectacle.
These images have sparked curiosity and suspicion, showing search operations in the sea and along the shores of Tel Aviv. Israeli newspapers report that the phone of former military prosecutor Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi may contain sensitive information and potentially damaging secrets. The case began when Yerushalmi disappeared for several hours last Sunday before being found alive, but without her phone. Investigators suspect she deliberately threw the device into the sea to destroy evidence linked to a leaked video that shocked Israel. The missing phone has now become the center of the investigation, as Israeli media suggest it may contain messages and communications revealing how the leak occurred, which led to Yerushalmi's resignation and subsequent arrest on charges of breach of trust and obstruction of justice.
When questioned by police, Tomer Yerushalmi said that she couldn't remember what had happened. She had no idea where her phone was. She seemed confused. The police, of course, were very keen to get their hands on the phone, believing that it likely contained significant evidence that may well pertain to the leak and cover-up cases. Tomer Yerushalmi was taken into police custody. Law enforcement was concerned that she may have staged her disappearance and possible suicidal intention in order to garner sympathy. They were also concerned that by releasing her, she may engage in tampering with evidence. She may communicate with other potential witnesses or individuals who were involved in these cases. Her initial 2-day remand in custody was extended on Wednesday for another 2 days, and against all odds, a swimmer at the Tel Aviv beach where Tomer Yerushalmi's car had been located saw what looked like a cell phone as she was walking out of the sea. She picked it up and voila, it was an iPhone 16. She turned it on and there was a photo of Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi with one of her children. After almost 5 days in the Mediterranean Sea, it was still working. Best ad for iPhone and Apple. Tomer Yerushalmi was then released on Friday to house arrest. The phone had been found. She's living under quite strict conditions, including no contact with her former co-workers, among other things. So, to sum up the facts, it seems that yes, the military advocate general was involved in leaking the alleged prisoner abuse video to the media, and possibly, as well, in a subsequent cover-up. I'm recording this introduction on Saturday evening, so it's very current. I thought it was important to clearly set out the twists and turns in this bizarre case. Now, to the main event, my interview that took place on Wednesday, November 5th with Ben Wahlhous, former officer in the IDF International Law Department, of the Military Advocate General, and now working in private practice in Israel. We get into the law, the extreme nature of the case, and the possible implications internationally. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Wednesday, November 5th, about 2:15 in the afternoon in Israel. Ben Wahlhous, wonderful to see you, and thank you so much for making the time to speak today to State of Tel Aviv and beyond.
Thank you, Vivian. It's lovely to be with you.
I would just like you to very briefly introduce yourself, Ben. Tell our listeners and viewers why I've turned to you, because you have, in my view, perfect credentials to discuss these issues today. Who are you?
Thank you, Vivian. I'm happy to be here and to talk with you. I served in the Military Advocate General Corps for many years. The unit is the legal unit of the Army. It's responsible for two main functions. The first is giving legal advice to the Army on a range of issues. It can be general day-to-day issues like phone contracts for soldiers, or when the Army builds a base and you need contracting agreements with the builders or so on. And also international law aspects, so like the conduct of hostilities when we're fighting our war, operational law advice. And it also is responsible for law enforcement in the military, which involves both prosecution and defense of soldiers. So I worked in the international law department, which means that I dealt with the advisory side of the unit for many years, and now I serve in that unit as a reserve duty officer.
What you're describing in terms of the scope of responsibility for the International Legal Advisory Group within the military, within the IDF, that would, of course, also extend to treatment of prisoners of war, prisoners captured during war or conflict with Hamas who are detained in Israel, correct?
Yes, that is correct. The international law governs both who can be detained on the battlefield to some extent and also their conditions of detention. And then there's also within the Israeli national law, there are laws about who can be detained and their conditions. And also within the IDF, there are certain procedures and rules and policies for how to deal with that. And October 7 presented a massive challenge in respect to the fact that suddenly we had thousands of detainees from the battlefield and there was a need to process them. And that's what we're talking about here with the Sde Teiman detention facility in southern Israel, where these incidents allegedly took place. It's a military base, and it was used since October 7 to sort of house these detainees in the initial process that they go through. So they would be brought from the battlefield to this facility. You have people whose profession it is to question them and work out exactly who they are. And if they decide that they need to be detained further for more questioning or because they do pose a security threat, then they get processed into that system and they might even be transferred over to the prison service. And if not, then they are taken back into Gaza by IDF forces.
Okay, but there would not be any other individuals detained at Sde Teiman who may have been arrested, for example, in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, or within Israel itself, would there?
No, it was just used for the operations in Gaza.
So let's kind of talk about what we're talking about. There was a video, and it was generated, made allegedly at some point in, I think, July 2024. Tell us what you know about the video and why it's so controversial.
So during the operations in Gaza, there were a number of allegations of mistreatment of Palestinian detainees inside this facility. The allegations came both from Palestinians who were in the facility and then released back into Gaza, and also came from Israelis who were present at the facility working in different capacities. And one of those allegations developed into a criminal investigation when there was a detainee who was brought for medical treatment in a hospital and he had serious injuries. And a number of reserve duty soldiers who were part of a unit that were responsible for security in the facility were then detained and arrested, and eventually there was an indictment filed against them for serious physical mistreatment. And the video that was then leaked to the media was footage from the security cameras from that facility, which allegedly shows some mistreatment of Palestinian detainees in the facility. And at the time that it was released, there was a huge uproar about where this video came from and how investigation materials were leaked. And a few weeks ago, as you mentioned, it came out that it was the Military Advocate General himself who authorized the leak, that others in the unit were either party to that decision or knew about it and didn't report it, and that then there were steps to cover up the fact that the leak came from MAGCOR senior officers. And that's the basis for the arrest of the Military Advocate General and suspicions against additional officers. And this is very much a developing story. There are hearings today in the court about extending the period of arrest for the Military Advocate General. So we're surely going to see some more developments as this progresses.
Are you able to comment or specify on the nature of the alleged abuse of this prisoner?
Not really, because the indictment just talks about really serious physical abuse. Because it's just at the indictment stage, they haven't presented their evidence or anything to the full extent. So I don't exactly know what it is that they're alleging.
Ben, what specifically does the indictment state?
Okay, so the indictments against the soldiers specifically alleged that they conducted serious physical assault on Palestinian detainees, which is something that, according to Israeli law and the IDF rules, in the laws that are made by the Knesset over years past, that's the sort of thing that shouldn't happen. When someone's in your custody, they shouldn't end up in hospital with signs of serious physical harm. So that's something that the military prosecution felt raised above the level of criminal misconduct, and that's why they filed the indictments.
So when you say shouldn't happen, I mean, there are moral codes and moral standards. What about legal standards?
Yeah, so there's legal prohibitions against carrying out physical assault on people who are in your custody, detainees, and this was allegedly a violation of those laws.
Okay, so it's stronger than a should not. It's must not. And if they
Yeah,
do,
absolutely. Yeah.
okay. So we have these indictments against how many soldiers was it?
5.
Then after these 5 soldiers were detained, were indicted, and they were held in custody in the IDF prison system, there was a very strong reaction from some members of the public. So let's start with that. What was the reaction and why?
Yes. So the very fact that the military police and the military prosecution were investigating soldiers for these alleged offenses, and then the indictments against them, it received a lot of public and political heat in Israel. And the rhetoric and the incitement against the law enforcement authorities, including from Knesset members and ministers, was absolutely enormous. They were vehemently assaulted in the public sphere. They were savagely criticized. They were absolutely pilloried for daring to investigate and prosecute Israeli soldiers. And the police and the prosecutors, even their family members, they were called traitors, they were called Nazis, and they really received quite a lot of threats. And that deteriorated to an incident where the military police came to an IDF base to detain those suspected of carrying out the offenses. There was a big call out for the public to come and protest those actions. And a lot of people turned up at the base, including government members and members of Knesset. And it deteriorated to a break in the base, a massive break-in, and an attempt to sort of prevent the military police from carrying out their duties. So there is huge public discord and debate within Israel about whether it is okay or right or acceptable to investigate and detain IDF soldiers suspected of criminal misconduct during the war. And this relates to the leak because in the military advocate general's resignation letter from last week, she said that the leak was to contend with those attacks, to show this is a serious matter. It's a crime. It needs to be dealt with. The IDF is a law abiding military, and that means prosecuting misconduct when and where it occurs. And then there was obviously a big outcry about the leak itself because it not only put the IDF soldiers in a bad light within Israeli society, but it also obviously made it to global headlines, and there were a lot more information and allegations coming out about the scope and the nature of Palestinian detainee mistreatment.
Okay. We've got this high level concern with respect to who leaked this. How did this happen? Who leaked the video? And so this is where it gets interesting. You have the MAG military attorney general unit self-investigating in effect, right?
Yes, that's correct. So, because there was such an outcry about this issue generally, that when the video was leaked, there was also an outcry as to the leak itself. And there were calls to investigate and to find out who was the source of the leak. And the person who was appointed to carry out that probe is the Deputy Military Advocate General, who was not involved in the investigation and the prosecution of the detainee abuse, but he is a member of the unit. And that at the time raised a lot of consternation about whether it's the right thing to have someone from the unit investigating something which might have to do with the unit.
Yeah. I mean, these, police associations all over the world tend to operate in that way. A complaint is made, they have an internal unit that investigates. And I think that over time, these kinds of approaches have become, I don't want to say discredited, but there's a little more cynicism around them. So, and this is such a high profile, such an important case. So, this is the individual leading the investigation. There is broader concern. Just explain briefly how this case, then the investigation into the leak, is taken outside of the military. Who takes control and why?
Well, I think the problem is that it wasn't taken outside of the military. The Deputy Military Advocate General conducted the probe with the support of the Attorney General's office. And then they then reported both to the Knesset and to the Supreme Court that the result of the probe was that they could not determine who was the source of the leak. I mean, the leak of the video itself, it could be criminal if it has an impact on the investigation itself. And in fact, one of the reports in the media now is that when they decided to leak the video, there was a discussion within the unit as to whether it would affect the investigation or not. And they decided that it wouldn't, and therefore it's okay to leak it. But this idea that afterwards there was a cover up and false testimony was provided to the Supreme Court and the Knesset, that in many respects is even more serious. And when we remember that there was such tension and focus on this issue within Israeli society about the very fact that there were indictments for detainee abuse. So now you have a situation that people who were responsible for that process are themselves alleged to have broken the law. And that's why it's achieving so much attention.
Okay, so we have been this alleged incident in the summer of 24. We have soldiers arrested, indicted. We have an investigation done with respect to who leaked video of this alleged conduct and why. And the investigation is done internally in the MAG unit. And the conclusion is we don't know. This issue has been kind of roiling in the system, moving through the system for about a year. And then suddenly, late last week, it explodes again. Why?
So what we understand is that one of the MAGCOR officers went for a polygraph in the context of being promoted to a new position. And in the polygraph, it came out that she had been authorized by the Military Advocate General or tasked with providing this video to the press. And that information was then given to the Chief of General Staff of the IDF, who then spoke to the Attorney General, and a criminal investigation into the Military Advocate General for her role in this process was opened. The Military Advocate General immediately went on leave and very shortly after resigned from her position with a public letter, and since then has been placed under arrest and is now being questioned while they also look at whom else may have been involved.
And then a few nights ago, there was a very dramatic development where Ifat Tomer Yerushalmi, it seemed that she had disappeared. She couldn't be found. Her spouse couldn't locate her, wasn't answering her phone. There were significant forces out looking for her. The end of the story is she was found safely. She appeared to be confused, and her phone had disappeared. I think that what we want to focus on here is the significance of what evidence may have been on her personal phone. Can you address that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm about that incident. I know as much as you do just from the press. And if her phone has disappeared, then I guess that could have an impact on the investigation because, it's obviously a source for evidence, perhaps could be an indication of who else was involved. And that's something that we'll have to hear how it plays out in the court process.
It's interesting. I'm sure you saw this. That it was yesterday on the news. The search for this phone is really big, focused, and intense. And, there are expert divers, and I'm sure from every part of police and possibly also IDF, they are studying the currents and the winds and everything in that area of the sea. And they're quite determined to find that phone and are optimistic that they will. So that says to me that they think that phone contains a lot of useful information in this case.
Yeah, I think, the search and perhaps the media attention to it, I think it just points to the significance of this case and the fact that you have senior legal figures from Israel's public service who are suspected of some very serious misconduct. And also just the general public interest in this case because of what it relates to. It relates to the rule of law. It relates to the independence of public service servants in the legal service. It relates to whether it's right to be investigating and prosecuting soldiers during wartime. So it relates to all these very big public interest issues. And I think that's why we're seeing so much scrutiny over whether they're going to find the phone or not.
And it also, I mean, you're right. And even bigger issues than that, because I don't have to tell you that the implications, international legal implications of how this investigation in this case unrolls, unravels, unfolds is really significant. The integrity of the justice system here is absolutely critical.
Right. So the military justice system is something that's based on the justice systems of other countries around the world, and many elements of our system share elements of other systems worldwide. And some of those elements are first independence. The military advocate general corps is independent from the chain of command, and they're really beholden only to the law. And in professional matters, as I mentioned, they're subject to the attorney general, who herself is the highest civilian legal authority in Israel, and herself who is independent. And we have this system of law enforcement where if there are allegations of criminal misconduct by IDF soldiers, whether it's stealing weaponry from a base or assaulting a fellow officer or misconduct on the battlefield, then that gets investigated and prosecuted by lawyers who should be independent and objective in their work. And that military justice system in Israel has been tried and tested, unfortunately, over many years because we have so much involvement in armed conflict. And it's really withstood any challenge against it in terms of whether it's not independent, whether it is biased, whether it's there just to defend IDF soldiers. And in many respects, the independence of this system and the efficacy of this system is something that's been almost an answer to many of Israel's critics internationally when they say that Israel is not abiding by international law, because we do investigate and we do prosecute where it's needed. So this incident, it has been used by some to perhaps suggest that there's a problem with the system. And I understand that because, when senior officers in that system are themselves alleged to break the law, then that could erode the trust in the system. But we can't be myopic about it. And we have to remember that this is an entire system made up of hundreds of people who are very professional, who are very committed to their role, who spend their entire professional careers helping Israel achieve its objectives in accordance with the rule of law. And that's something that, must continue, and it's something we must focus on. And we shouldn't let this incident throw all of that history out of the window.
Absolutely. But I think that one of the big concerns in this particular case has been the way in which, again, the political echelon, the coalition government, senior cabinet ministers have inserted themselves into this issue, this particular case, with very vociferous comments and indicating, how they view it. And when you have members of the political government interfering or commenting in this way, does that not kind of impact the credibility, perceived independence of the justice system, whether it's military or civilian?
Well, I think often when there's criticism against law enforcement officials, I think it only goes to show that the system is independent because it may not be doing exactly the bidding of what the political echelon wants. Now, we have to distinguish between this incident of the leak and the cover-up and the allegations of detainee abuse themselves, which is what the video are related to. There's no question that it's politically sensitive, to investigate and prosecute soldiers during wartime. There are not many countries who do that, actually. Most countries will do it after the war is completed. If you look at the experience of Australia and Canada and the UK in regards to their conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on, they're investigating allegations that happened decades ago, and they're investigating it today. But, the IDF, it wants to be an army that abides by the rules. It is, and that should be a source of pride for us. And those rules, which were passed by the Knesset, and are also obligations under international law, they include the prohibition against mistreatment of detainees.
So we have a situation now where the military attorney general remains in custody. I think she's been in custody now for 2 days. She did appeal that initial order, and the court came back and said, no, we're not letting you out. And I believe there's another hearing today to extend that detention. Is that correct? And what do you know about that?
No, that's correct. And they did extend her detention by another couple of days.
Okay. And I'm just going to conjecture that part of the reason they're doing that is they want to find this phone and kind of, take away the possibility that this individual, the military attorney general, may further try to sabotage, destroy evidence. Station identification time. You are listening to or watching State of Tel Aviv and Beyond. Please take a moment to rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us 5 stars, pretty please. Review us, comment on our website, comment on YouTube, on Substack. Every review helps to get our material and content in front of more people. If you are not already a paying subscriber, please consider becoming one. You can go to our website at stateoftelaviv.com, just follow the subscribe tab, or if you would prefer, buy me a cup of coffee. You'll see the tab on our website in the upper right-hand corner. Thank you. And now, back to Ben Wahlhous. Aside from the military attorney general, Ifat Yerushalmi, who remains in custody, have there been any high-ranking IDF legal officers that have been drawn into this case at this point?
Yeah, so the investigation now is also focusing on who else was involved, because while the military advocate general took responsibility for the leak, there were seemingly other officers who were involved. At the moment, the person who is the chief military prosecutor under her has been put under arrest. There were a few people involved. But that also doesn't necessarily taint the entire system. I mean, as we said, this issue of the leak and the cover up is distinct from the allegations itself. And that process is something that it doesn't seem it was tainted. There was an investigation, and now there's an indictment, and now there'll be a court process. So it's very important to make sure that we have the right people in positions of command in these units, but it's also very important that we don't let this reflect on the system itself.
So, Ben, before we wrap up, I want to switch to a broader context. We've been very focused on how this issue is perceived and understood in Israel, but there's a much broader context for it internationally. And I'd love you to comment on if and how this case could impact individual Israeli men who have served in the IDF either as conscripts or subsequently in the reserve forces, and particularly in the last 2 years. We know that there's one in particular, NGO based in Brussels, that exists to track down Israelis who served in the IDF in the last 2 years in the Gaza Strip, and to make efforts to have those individuals detained under international criminal arrest warrants in third countries. Is there any kind of link or connection between what's going on now in Israel with this case and this focus by some people and determination to arrest IDF soldiers abroad?
Well, there, I think we need to look at, the fact that we can distinguish between the conduct of a few individuals here and the trust in the system itself. And if we look, for example, at what's happened since these allegations came out, I mean, the Attorney General immediately opened a criminal investigation into this incident. Some of the suspects have now been arrested. They're conducting an investigation. The military advocate general resigned. They've appointed someone else in her place. So they're taking all these steps which show that the criminal justice system in Israel still works. And as I said, this conduct of the individuals is separate from the system itself. And the system itself needs to retain its independence, and it needs to retain its commitment, both to investigate internally people who do the wrong thing, but also to prosecute misconduct by IDF soldiers in the battlefield. And we need to make sure that stays the way it has been up until now in order to be able to contend with those allegations overseas that this is all just a fake.
So in the meantime, you think that there's no kind of immediate elevation of concern?
No, I don't think so, because firstly, the allegations that are here, they don't take away from the allegations of the incident of detainee abuse itself. I mean, no one's alleging that this video is fabricated. No one's saying that, the evidence that is being relied upon in the indictment was made up. And, while we're going to see a court process and you give them the presumption of innocence, that's an important element. And also you see the steps that have been taken since this information has come out about the leak. I think it shows that the criminal justice system in Israel remains effective. But it will be important to shore up public trust in the unit and faith that it can continue to fulfill its duties. And I think they're taking the right steps there. The fact that they've already replaced the military advocate general with a very experienced and professional lawyer, and the fact that Israel is still investigating and prosecuting misconduct on the battlefield while continuing to provide legal advice to the IDF forces that are engaged in operational conduct. I think that is the most important element.
I absolutely agree with you. And Ben, you're someone who served in that unit for a number of years. You're now in private practice, of course. I'm assuming that you're still in touch with some of your old colleagues. And I'd imagine that this event is beyond disruptive for those people still in the trenches, so to speak.
It is. But I think it points to something that perhaps is a wider issue, and that's just the political atmosphere and rhetoric in Israel. As I mentioned, the military advocate general, she said in a resignation letter that the video was leaked in order to contend with the serious threats and the incitement against the military legal system and the military police. They were called traitors and Nazis, and they had threats issued against them as well. So there's this wider issue in our society of how citizens can talk to each other, how you can call public officials traitors, how those responsible for helping Israel retain its commitment to the rule of law are pilloried as criminals and as traitors. And we just marked this week 30 years to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, where incitement was such a key element of what was going on those days. And I think we should try and take that lesson and be a little bit better.
And that is the perfect note on which to conclude. So, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your insight. Someone who's been very close to the issue, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to you for comment in the future as this case develops.
Thank you, Vivian.
Okay, now we're doing part 3. I'm going to give you a factual update to the moment. Sunday, November 9th, afternoon in Israel. Yuli Edelstein, member of Knesset, former cabinet minister, former prisoner of Zion in the Soviet Union, a man of unimpeachable integrity, who has also run afoul of Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cadre of Likud and other loyalists. And he's done that for daring to dissent on some key issues, like the imperative of passing a law that will require all Israelis, including the ultra-Orthodox, to serve in the IDF or national service. In an interview on Saturday night on Channel 12 with journalist Dana Weiss, Edelstein spoke about the last year or so in political life and how disturbing it has been. He said that it's clear to him now that neither Prime Minister Netanyahu nor the ultra-Orthodox political parties ever had any intention of enacting a law that would draft the ultra-Orthodox into the IDF. In the same interview, Edelstein also responded to the Sde Teiman affair, with particular focus on the conduct of former MAG Yifat Tomer-Yerushalmi. He was horrified, he said, when he heard of her arrest. He was close to tears. He recalled having met with her privately and in meetings several times, and he said, "She lied to my face," repeatedly. His disgust is total. And it's important to understand that Yuli Edelstein is not the type to vent his thoughts on such matters so freely. And it gets worse. This morning, we awoke to news that Tomer Yerushalmi had been rushed to hospital. Reports are that she was ill from a drug overdose. Overnight, metaphorically, Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi has been disgraced and her conduct carried on for an extended period of time. It was not one moment. She understands that her personal career and private lives are done, over. And given what we know already, the likelihood of her spending significant time in prison is strong. By her own admission, after all, she orchestrated a leak and then lied for more than a year to cover it up. One has to ask, if she's capable of this, what else has she done while in this role? A top lawyer in the IDF. And I expect that looking into such questions and issues will be a significant part of the upcoming investigation. Her entire career will be scrutinized. Time for part 4, a little levity. In Israel, we live in a pressure cooker that never seems to lose steam. And so humor, even black humor, is a critical life skill. It's also a very Jewish trait, one that seems to have become embedded in our DNA after millennia of persecution. So the whole iPhone thing, how did Yifat Tomer Yerushalmi's iPhone, which seems to have been thrown into the Mediterranean Sea, how is it possible that it was immersed in seawater for 5 days and still works? It's pretty crazy, no? So, at the close of their weekly political talk show on Saturday evening, journalists Ben Caspit and Amit Segal conducted a science experiment on camera. It's cute, clever, and it'll be very interesting to see what the outcome is. We're showing you here a clip that Amit Segal posted on social media, and we've added English subtitles. Enjoy.
הכנו ארוך ניסוי, הכינונו מראש. קיבלנו את הדגם החדיש של אייפון מסלקום במתנה. כן, עם ה-5G, כדי לראות הכל, התנאים תואמים. עם רשות להתעלל בו. אוקיי, אז קודם כל, זה. יש לך עוד בקבוק? יש עוד. יכול למזוג בינתיים. אתה צודק. אז אנחנו פשוט נעשה סימולציה. עכשיו, אתה יודע שאחת הבעיות זה לא רק המים, אחת הבעיות זה שגם צריך מלח. הכין אותי מראש, אז אני ממליח פה את הפצעים. כן, זה התפקיד שלך בעולם. הנה הרבה מלח. יפה. עוד מים, נכון? לדעתי זה מספיק לסלולר. חושב? לא, שיחסה. הוא קובע פה יופי. שיחסה, יופי. זה גם, הוא נתפס במים רדודים. הבנתי, אוקיי, זה ככה זה מספיק. ועכשיו הטלפון, זה הטלפון, אוקיי. ראית איזה תמונה יש עליו? כן, זה ב-AI. ועכשיו? זהו. הפסולת לסל וחסל. אנחנו נתקשר אליו אחריי, נראות אם... מה קורה אם אתה, יש לך את המספר? שלא דאגנו... יש לי את המספר. בקיצור, אנחנו מצלמים את האירוע הזה ביום שישי. ניתן לזה יממה, קצת יותר מיממה. ותכף בשבת, בשידור חי, אנחנו נבדוק מה עלה בגורלו של הברנש הזה פה בפנים. והטלפון יהיה פה, ילווה את התוכנית, כדי שאף אחד לא יחשוב שכאילו... נבדוק עם הוואטסאפים ששלחנו ממנו שרירים וקיימים, אם הוא עובד, אם הוא מצלצל. והאם הסיפור הפנטסטי הזה באמת היה במציאות, או שהוא תרגיל חקירה או משהו אחר? כן, מה עושים? תוצאות המבחן, לי יש את המספר, תנגב, בינתיים אני אתקשר, רגע, בוא נדליק. אני לא מאמין. זה דולק? זה דולק. רגע, זה דלק? רגע, נו. בוא נעביר למצב. מצב טיסה. אנחנו מוציאים את זה במצב טיסה, כי זה המצב... אי אפשר, זה קצת קשה. זה רטוב. רגע, בוא נראה אם אפשר להתקשר. אוקיי. איך מעבירים? הוא כמו חדש. הנה, מצב טיסה. חייג. אוקיי, עכשיו בוא נתקשר. היה פה איזה וואטסאפ? בוא נראה. וואטסאפ לא, כי אין את המספר. אנשי קשר. לא, אנשי קשר. הנה זה. וואי, עכשיו אתה רואה לכל מי שהתקשרתי זה. לא. ראיתי למי הוא התקשר. לא, הוא התקשר אליי, האמת. בבקשה. טלפון. עמית סגל, רוצה לענות? זה עובד. עובד. אחת, שומע? עובד. אז יכול להיות שהכל נכון. אז נראה לי שיש לנו גרסה. מה שנשאר לנו... קודם כל זה 30 שעות. יממה. ולא 110. 30 שעות ולא 110. אבל כמו חדש. כמו חדש.
Thanks again for tuning in. Please rate us on your favorite podcast platform. Go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, and consider supporting our work financially. We are truly independent, and every subscriber and supporter makes a huge difference. You can find on our website the subscribe button, or, if you prefer, make a one-time donation on Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. You'll see the icon at the top of the screen on our website. stateoftelaviv.com. Thanks for being here. Until next time, stay safe. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to hello@stateoftelaviv.com. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Yon Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team. Thanks to you for being here. We'll be back soon.